Well, good afternoon. We're connecting everybody live to our webinar. My name is Lenny Enzel. I am a retired Army nurse and a member of the Army Nurse Corps Association. Very happy to have been once again asked to moderate the 6th ANCA, Army Nurse Corps Association webinar. And also especially happy because we also just celebrated on Wednesday the 121st anniversary of the Army Nurse Corps. And we are lucky enough to have as our guest speaker, Major General Gale Pollock, who was not only the Chief of the Army Nurse Corps, but also an acting Surgeon General, the first time a woman or a nurse got to be in that position. So the mission of the Army Nurse Corps Association is preserving our past, capitalizing on the present, and embracing the future. And General Pollock is the perfect person to reach across the generations of Army nurses and others who have joined us to share her story and her brilliant career. Her bio was in the invitation, so I'm not going to go through it.
Thank you. Thank you. I hate hearing my obituary read out loud.
So I hope you did get to review it. Any of her accomplishments alone would have been impressive, but to think that one woman did all of this is mind-blowing. So today's format's going to be a little different than our past webinars. There's not a formal presentation, no death by PowerPoint. Rather, it's going to be in a Q&A format. We ask that you put your questions for General Pollock in the Q&A part of Zoom, which should show up on either the bottom or the side of your screen, depending on how you have your Zoom set up. Please don't put them in the chat. I'll try and flip back to the chat just to make sure I'm not missing something. But we want the questions in the Q&A. And once we get through the questions that I have for General Pollock and some that you put in there, we're going to ask that if you'd like to speak to her or you want to speak your question that you may have put in the Q&A session, that you raise your hand. And that's also down there with your chat, and you can hopefully see the participants. I know sometimes people can't. And that way I'll call on you and we'll try to prevent everybody talking over everybody. I ask that you please mute your microphone unless you've been called on to speak. At the end of the webinar, you're going to receive a very brief survey. I think it has about 3 questions. And we ask that you please give us your feedback so we can continue to have value-added presentations. We'll probably be looking at having one around the April timeframe. And we especially would like to hear what you would like us to present. So I'm going to start with some questions for General Pollock. And my first question is, you received an Army scholarship to attend college. Was that a tough application process? And how did you learn about it?
Lenny, that's a great question. And first, I'm delighted to be here and have the opportunity to talk to all of you. And I do hope you'll ask questions because I hate death by PowerPoint. So I refused to do it. I said, come up with questions or I don't want to play. So Lenny did a great job with questions. This one surprised me. It wasn't even on our list. But I actually joined the Army because of care that the Army Medical Department provided to a quasi big brother. Many of you know that I grew up in a real crazy house. My father drank. He was very violent. It was a scary place. But he would invite soldiers home for Sunday dinner because when he was in the Navy during World War II, he really appreciated that invitation from people to have a homemade meal. So he was always bringing soldiers home for dinner. Now, I still can't imagine the difference between a sober guy in the workplace and this drunk monster that they would find at our house. But, you know, he was always bringing people home. My mom was a great cook. But one of the soldiers that he brought home was older. He was in his mid-20s and he just felt really safe. And so I sat down with him and said, this is what's going on here. And I'm really scared. I don't think I'm going to live to get out of here. And he looked at me and says, Gale, you're going to get out of here and you're going to do great things. I was like, whoa, whoa. Nobody ever encouraged me like this. This is kind of wild. But then he was in the Army and went off and did a bunch of training, and he went off to Vietnam, and he lost a leg in Vietnam. But the Army Medical Department kept him alive. And I was like, wow, he gets to stay the knot at the end of my rope. And they have no idea. The men and women that took care of him have no idea what they did for me. And I want to be one of them, because I want to take care of somebody else's then only big brothers and take care of their family that loves them. So I decided then that I was going to be an Army nurse. And I never read the newspaper. It's always bad news. It's bad news now. It was bad news in the 70s. But one Sunday, I just felt compelled to look at the paper. And I start flipping through the paper, and I read about this Army scholarship called the RAIN program, the Walter Reed Army Institute of Nursing. And I read this and I think, this is how I'm going to college. Because I knew my family wasn't going to send me. And, there was a limit to what I could earn at that time. And so I said to my mom, I just figured out how I'm going to college. And she's like, you're not going to college. I'm like, whatever. And so I sat down and I started thinking about it. What are they looking for? So I worked in a nursing home. I made sure I had good grades. I was president of a zillion clubs in high school, so I could write down that I had leadership responsibilities, and applied for the scholarship. And I got an invitation to go to Philadelphia to do an interview. And Colonel Barberi, some of you will remember Colonel Barberi, was the nurse officer who interviewed me. And she looked at me, and it was so odd because they let my mom in the room with me, so she got to listen to everything we were saying. And she said, well, Miss Pollock, why should we select you for the Army Nurse Corps? And I sat up straight and I looked at her and I said, because I'm one of the brightest young women in America. And if you don't scoff me up, somebody else will. And my mom was like, ah. She didn't just say that. So on the way home, it was about a 2-hour drive to Philadelphia. My mom chewed my butt the whole time about how they won't want anybody so full of themselves. And I'm like, Mom, it's a competition. Nobody else is going to say, pick Gale, don't pick me. So thank you for your input. So a couple of weeks later, I got my letter in the mail that said, congratulations, Miss Pollock. You are now a member of the Walter Reed Army Institute of Nursing Scholarship Program, and welcome to the Army. So that's how I ended up in the Army. My mom signed the paperwork. I was only 17, and I hung around in the Army until they wouldn't keep me.
That's great. I think I had mentioned to you all the nice comments that people had put on Facebook when I put out multiple announcements that you were speaking. And I just wanted to read this to you because it's one of my heroes, is General Kannemeyer. And
Yeah.
she said, General Pollock, so delighted to see and hear your story today. I remember our working together at Dakowitz years ago. So appreciate you and your work in so many areas. So that's pretty special having her.
She was great to work with. She was great to work with.
So my next question, who were your mentors in your Army career, and what were your most important takeaways from them?
Mentoring, they did it even then when we didn't call it mentoring. I would submit that my first was my boss in Germany when I was a nurse anesthetist. And Jay Walt, he lives in Minneapolis now. We're still in touch. And he was just fabulous because when you do anesthesia, every day, everything you do isn't perfect. It's usually pretty good because you're so focused on taking good care of your patient, but you're often not happy because you could have been better. And when you were beating yourself up about, oh, I should have done that better, blah, 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 he'd come in and go, I saw you do this today and it was fabulous. And you go, really? Wow. And so he'd take you away from the negative spiral you were on and tell you that, you did this really well. And when the OR itself was like bogging down and there was a lot of negative emotion, he'd come and grab a couple of us. And he was a big guy. He was probably 225 pounds. He's a big man, 6'2" or so. And he'd put one of us on each side, like we're in the Wizard of Oz. And we'd go skipping down the hallway in the operating room, reaching for invisible butterflies. And so he taught me how important the morale and well-being of the team was. And I don't think he knew that he was doing all that for me. And I'm kind of hoping he's on today. But he was my first, and it really started me thinking about the importance of how to influence the team. The next one was not an AMED officer. It was General Jim Campbell, who, when I went to Fort Drum for my first command position, he was the installation commander. And he's the one who really taught me how to lead in a way that would make the Army proud. How to know what was going on with your team, how to not be full of yourself. He was a 2-star guy, pretty powerful up there. He was the installation commander. He was the commander of 10th Mountain. But when he would go out into the community and they'd go, "Oh, hi, who are you?" He'd just go, "I'm Jim Campbell. I'm a soldier from Drum." And I'd think, wow, how humble. And he's the one who taught me how to do true counseling. Because when I'm in my first command up there, I've never gotten quarterly counseling in the AMED. And Campbell's over in Bosnia. And I get a phone call that says, the boss needs to talk to you. And I'm like, oh, good grief. He's across the freaking pond. What did I do that's so horrible that he's going to have to call back up here and chew my butt about something? So all weekend it's like, what did I do? What did I do? What did I do? Monday afternoon, the fax machine fires up and out comes a handwritten counseling form. And I'm like, what the heck? So we get on the phone. I said, "Sir, what time is it over there?" He goes, "Well, it's 11:30. I said, "Why aren't you in bed? Your sleep's more important than talking to me." And he said, "No, that's where you're wrong. There's nothing more important than me developing my senior leaders." It's like, wow. It was my husband, who was an Army officer, who a couple of weeks later said, "You know how fired up that made you when he did that? He gave you a written counseling form. He talked to you on the phone about what you were doing well and what you're doing poorly." I said, "Yeah." He goes, "I wonder if your staff might like it." Like, yeah, it'd be really nice if I could have those thoughts, but that's why I'm surrounded by brilliant people, and my husband's one of those brilliant people. So that's when I started doing it. And for all of the years that I was in command, I did those written counselings. I can't say that everybody appreciated them all the time, but oh well. So those two, Jay Walt and Jim Campbell, were the ones that I think taught me the most about how to take care of my team.
Thank you. So what do you think was the most important tool you had in your toolbox when you were the chief of the Army Nurse Corps?
I would say my ability to communicate with people that were different than me and to explain challenges from their perspective. So instead of explaining why it was a problem for me or the Nurse Corps or the AMED, I would say, if you were in this circumstance, because I think one of the best examples of that is our nurses were burning out with 12 and 15-month deployments into Iraq and Afghanistan. And I was like, whoa, I can't have everybody leaving. The length of time that we're going is killing us because it's just too much pain and suffering. There's too much bodily destruction that we're viewing every freaking day. So I was like, okay, how am I going to change this? How am I going to change this? And then I went, oh, wait a minute. The other Army general officers who've been over there have needed to give out Purple Hearts for their troops that got wounded. So I make appointments and go on into one of their offices and sit down and go, when's the last time you gave out a Purple Heart? And they're like, ugh. And several of them said, Gale, if I never give another one, it'll be too soon. It kills me to do that. I said, oh, that's interesting that you say that, because seeing those young men that are injured like that every day is killing my nurses. And they're like, I said, do you want them to stop being available to your soldiers when they need them? They're like, no, of course not. I said, then you need to help me change their deployment time. They can't do a year or 15 months. They need to do 90 days like the other professional officers that go. We don't send the docs for a year or 15 months. We can't send the nurses. And I gathered a group of them together. And then we went to the chief of basically HR, the PER, and they said, we want to change this for the nurse corps. And so I asked them how they'd cope, and, they said it wasn't going to be easy. And so they helped. So being able to explain things from someone else's perspective was, I think, a very powerful tool. And I think that I got pretty good at that, because when I worked at the Pentagon, a CIA officer told me he wanted me to learn a program called process communication. And that was developed by a clinical psychologist in the 70s. And they actually use that for when they're putting together all the space teams, so they understand how people behave under stress. And it teaches us how to recognize the different personality traits that are the strongest in the people that we're talking with, so we can talk to them in their communication style. And even if you don't do it well, because it's not your preferred method, people sense that you're trying, to connect with them. And even if you don't do the communication perfectly, they accept it. And I would tell you that learning those things, and it was communication, because all of the challenges, it doesn't matter what kind of dilemma you're facing, what kind of challenge, what kind of media disaster, what kind of congressional disaster, any of those crazy times that we face, it will be our ability to communicate with one another that allow us to really power through it.
Thank you. I'm gonna read a comment from our mutual friend, Roy Harris, because he's going to need to sign off, and he had a question for you.
Sure.
Welcome, Gale. I was always so impressed that you were so successful in both the CRNA world and the Baylor world, both in terms of clinical excellence and admin leadership. Those would usually be two complete career tracks for any excellent officer. What led you to pursue the Baylor program after working as a CRNA? Thanks for taking the time to be with us today.
Thanks, Roy. And thank you again for all the help you gave me when I was the Corps Chief, and before, and for your friendship afterwards. Why did I go to the Baylor program is really the bottom of the question here. I aspired to leadership, and historically, being a CRNA locked you in an operating room and denied you had any other skills. And I was determined to change that paradigm, because if you don't let the ones of us who have been working on developing leadership skills do some leadership, we're going to go somewhere that we can. And the attrition for CRNAs was high, and I wanted to try and break that paradigm. I'm a fixer. I like to attack a big problem and fix it. So I decided that the people who had the most power and control for the day-to-day functioning of the AMED were the MSC officers, and they went to the Baylor program. And so I was going to go to the Baylor program. So I was over in Germany when I applied, And because we were so short nurse anesthetists, I couldn't go to the advanced course. I'm sorry, not the advanced course, to the CGSC. So I was doing it by correspondence. But when I applied for the Baylor program, it wasn't finished. Well, it was really hard to get all that stuff back and forth because we didn't have electrons and faxes then. We're mailage back and forth from the US to Germany. And so I was working on it, and I had it scheduled so that by the time my 3 years were finished in Germany, I'd be done. And so I get a letter in the mail that says, you can't go. You didn't do the CGSC. Well, so needless to say, you can't go to the anesthesia program, and now you get told you can't go to the Baylor program. So you know how that responded with me, not well. And so I started talking to the MSc officers that were over in Launchstoel, and they said, here, call the program director for Baylor and tell him why you're not done. So I talked to him on the phone, and then he called Nurse Corps branch and said, I've opened another slot and I want Pollock in it. And they're like, whoa, 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 we've got her slotted for anesthesia. And he said, no, we're pulling her over into graduate school. And so then I decided that I was going to learn the MSc secret code and start to figure out how is it they were so powerful inside. The docs were real powerful because they were docs, but the MSCs controlled everything, the dollars, the people, the buildings, the supplies. I'm like, no, I need to understand this. And actually, I'm an honorary MSc, according to their invitations years ago. And it was learning how to speak their language and being able to then put an issue into a discussion, in a dialogue that would resonate with whatever kind of niche they lived in. Same thing I did with the general officers for the deployment. So it was just, just another way to learn it. And I was also recognizing that even though the Army Medical Department didn't want to believe it, I believed that the leadership opportunities would open for non-physicians. And I also recognized that I would then be competing against Medical Service Corps officers. And I was going to make darn sure, how's that? And is that a nice polite way to say that? Darn sure that they didn't have a leg up on me. So went to the Baylor program, joined the American College of Healthcare Executives, became a fellow, played the game so that none of them could say, oh, well, we do this and Gale doesn't do that. Good luck. Try some other sucker. So that's why.
Thank you. And thanks for the question, Roy.
Mm-hmm.
So you told us a little bit about changing length of deployments. That, of course, was a huge thing. I remember the 12 and 15 months deployments very well. Tell me about any other substantial changes you feel like you made during your career in your varying roles.
Okay, well, thank you for the varying role piece. Because of the Baylor program, my reward from the Nurse Corps when I finished was to go back to be a staff nurse anesthetist. Thank you very much. So I was like, okay. So then I started, getting, reconnecting with everybody in anesthesia. How you doing? People were just madder than it can be. And they're leaving left and right. And I'm like, whoa, okay, what did you learn in the Baylor program? If you can't quantify it, if you can't do the metrics, you don't have anything. You can't win an argument. You got to have the data. So I invented a survey tool, and I personally mailed it to all of the nurse anesthetists. I got their locations, I mailed it to the hospitals that they were assigned to. And I got over an 80% return on my survey. I used that then to do the analysis of these are issues, these are not, blah, blah, blah. And that survey and that documentation was used for the first incentive specialty pay that the Army gave to nurse anesthetists. So, just, you got to shake it up. So I would say that was a big one. So I knew that I knew how to crack that code. So that was kind of in the back of my head. Then when I was in the Pentagon, it was the first Gulf War, and General Reno was the 3-star and set in charge of the PER. And he came in, he called me in, he said, Gale, I'm going to war. I'm critically short nurse anesthetists. Can you explain to me why you're on my staff at the Pentagon? I was like, oh yeah, sir, no problem. We have no leadership opportunities. And if you pull me out of here and make me a nurse anesthetist, you got 20 more nurse anesthetists that are going to jump ship tomorrow. You know, I'm the one that's trying to break the paradigm. I'm trying to show that we bring value other than our anesthesia skills. And he looked at me and said, okay, then you got to do something for me. I was like, sure. He said, I have to write huge checks because the incidence of smoking in the Army is so high. Figure out how to change that. That's your job, nurse. I said, okay, I got it. Well, needless to say, the medical departments weren't willing to touch that. So I worked that so that it was picked up by the environment people. And I led that campaign based on secondhand smoke and the damage that smoke and tobacco burns and fires and yada, yada, due to our installations and our environment. We looked at time lost to training, and I painted that, again, painting the picture from a perspective of somebody else. When I talked to an aviation leader, I'd say, would you like another 2 helicopters next year? And he was like, you bet. How's that going to happen? I said, well, if we'd stop smoking on our installations, this is how much money we're wasting in fires and furniture and repainting and blah, blah, blah. And they said, but you're with the medical team. I said, the medical team's not going to run this. You need to help me find another organization that will run it. And so it was up at Department of Defense Environment. Hugh Wolf was the officer that took that monster on and brought that policy to bear. So that was a cool one. And then I don't think I really shook anything up else until I became Chief of the Corps. And if there's any of the folks here that were with me when I got my initial briefings as the Corps Chief, they'll report that they had to unscrew me from the ceiling when I found out that the nurses from the Guard and Reserve were still not BSN nurses. You know, I knew that Congress had changed the law in the 70s, and that's why one of the reasons they had the RAIN program, and that's why we had BSN nurses on active duty. And that's why we had all of the non-BSN nurses go back for their baccalaureate degree. And then I found out that the Guard and Reserve had never come into compliance with that. Made me nuts. It took me all 4 years. And Major General Deb Wheeling, who was in the Guard, sent me a copy of the policy when it was finally signed by the Reserve and the Guard. And the way that we did it, because you got to find ways to make it work for people. They were convinced they couldn't recruit if we didn't let LPNs in. And I was like, okay. So then as you figured out that I go around and I talk to the different GOs and try and pick their brains and help them see things my way. And so I asked them, why should we let nurses who don't have a baccalaureate degree advance to captain when you see someone that you think can be an officer, you send them to OCS and they can stay on active duty until they're captains. But in order to be selected to be a captain, they have to have gotten their baccalaureate degree. And if they don't, they revert to their enlisted grade. Why can't we, because the Guard and Reserve are so afraid that they can't recruit, why don't we let the nurses in as second lieutenants? And they could even get promoted to first lieutenant, but they can't get promoted to captain unless they get their degree. And as far as I'm concerned, they could stay in the Guard for 20 freaking years as a lieutenant. If they don't demonstrate a desire to improve professionally, then they're also demonstrating no capability for leadership. So how about we do it that way? And that's how we did it. I made myself a note. I'm going to turn away while you ask me the question because I think I had something else written down.
Do you want me to ask you your next question, or did you want to answer more about that one?
I could just give you a list because I was making a list before. We did the combat injury assessment program over in Iraq and Afghanistan in a partnership with Colonel John Holcomb from the surgery center in San Antonio. We got nurses into SF groups and they actually gave us line and paragraph numbers. They didn't just want to steal us. I said, of course you want us, but without a line and paragraph number, guys, kiss it. We got line and paragraph numbers. We got the PhD focus for the anesthesia program going. That was before I got promoted. Barb Bruno, who was the wind beneath my wings when I was the Corps Chief, because I would say, this is what I want to do, and I'm too freaking busy, and you're going to have to do it. And Barb figured it out. She was simply amazing. We got our RN First Assist program going. We got incentive pays for nursing going. I think it's a cool list. I'm proud of those things.
Yes,
They were not my ideas often, but by building a consensus and working with other people and painting it in a way that they could get, then we could get the support and the help.
yes. Well, you did. You changed a lot of things for the Corps and for women in the Army as well. What were your major challenges?
My major challenges, that depends. It makes me think about a question that people have often asked me, was it lonely? Yes, you're very isolated as a leader and a commander. And I would tell you that if you need to be liked by people, forget it. Don't go into leadership. Don't seek command because it just doesn't happen. So if there's one person in history I could meet, I would want to meet Abraham Lincoln. And I hung on to something that he said, and I'll paraphrase it. You can please some of the people all the time. You can please some of the people some of the time. You can please some of the people none of the time. And if that mix is not good for you, then don't try to play this game. And so on the days that people were really slamming on me, I just say, hey, about, I feel you. So being isolated and being so busy that you don't have time to be a friend because you're just running in so many different directions. I was trying to take care of me because I don't think we can take care of other people if we're not taking care of ourselves. So Gale needs 8 hours of sleep. She needs exercise. She needs devotional time, and she needs to eat right. And if I'm not doing those 4 things, my day just doesn't come together. And my staff was comfortable enough with me that if I skipped something, because I do all those things, if you've got a good night's sleep, you're starting right. I'd go exercise, I'd do my devotions, I'd have a decent breakfast, I'd come to work. And if I skipped any of those, they'd go, ma'am, what'd you blow off today? And I'd growl, why? They go, well, we can tell that you're not taking care of yourself. So which piece did you blow off so we can fix your calendar so that you can get fixed? And to have developed the relationship with my subordinates, with my senior leaders, that they were willing to say to me, okay, Pollock, you're all screwed up today. What's going on? Because I didn't have time to reach out and have a phone call with somebody, to sit down in the evening with somebody with a glass of wine before I went to sleep. And having those relationships with my staff so they could talk to me, and taking care of myself is what helped me get through. But It's lonely up there. And I think that that's probably the biggest challenge. I knew that people weren't going to like me. I knew they were going to pick on me because you're only a nurse. Like I'm not only anything. If I'm limited, it's in your brain, not mine.
Exactly. Well, thank you. I'm going to go to some of the questions that folks have typed in. And the first one is one's very similar to what I already had. And it was, what are your feelings concerning the organizational changes with the transition to the Defense Health Administration? And I will.
Defense Health Agency.
Agency, rather, yes. And
Yeah.
My question was similar. I wanted to know about how you thought it would affect the Army Nurse Corps and the Army Medical Department.
Well, I've been an advocate for purple. Gee, what? It should be a surprise. I'm surrounded by purple here. My hair is purple. My nails are purple. My shirt's purple. I've been an advocate of purple for a long time because other than the actual point of injury, whether it's on a ship or on an airfield or in battle, the point of injury may be different. So the type of injury may be a little different. But as soon as we lift that person out of that point of injury, it shouldn't freaking matter what color uniform we wear. We should be doing everything on earth that we can to take the best possible care of that man or woman. If the problems that we've had with the transition with the Defense Health Agency have been power and turf, it hasn't been a problem for the men and women that are still doing hands-on patient care because they're trying to do the best they can earthly do for that patient. It's the big gorillas in the room that want to beat their chests and have power and turf and control that don't want to relinquish that to someone else that they think is different than them. And yeah, we have different cultures in each of the services. But if we think about our values and why we're there, we ought to be able to overcome all of that silliness. And that's why I think you're seeing nurses rise to leadership positions, because we're willing to look at it. I describe it from a round table. King Arthur and the round table, all of the knights that were there had different skills, but he got perspectives from all of them and made the best decision for the organization. And that's what we ought to be doing now, listening to all the different perspectives and making the best decision for the collective organization, not for this little niche here, not a little niche there. It's going to continue to be painful at the senior level, but it will be important that if there are obstacles that are occurring in the facilities, that word has to get up. And if you can't get it up your chain, that's why people like Patty Horaho, me, Jimmy Keenan, Barb Holcomb, we're your resource. Because you get the scoop to us, we're still having conversations with the Army and the DOD leadership. And we can say, gee, don't think this is working well. Well, what makes you think that? Well, I have information from this fort and this fort and this fort and this fort. And, more than one is a trend. So use us, because it's going to continue to be bumpy. But if there's real stupidity going on or you have a real concern, share it.
Mute. I am going to ask you another one of the questions that were submitted.
Sure.
This one is from Richard St. Louis, and he said, do you think the 66 Papa family nurse practitioner will be able to ever be slotted in the 65 Delta PA slot in Force Com units interchangeably?
I want to say yes. Because there are, it would be good for the organizations to have a rotation of perspectives, because the PAs think one way and nurses think a different way. And when we share those different perspectives with leadership in the different organizations, it helps them make better decisions. So I think it would be a good idea. But you get back into the power and turf and control thing. So you have to find the adults in the room. And I wish that I could say that I always worked with adults. I have this fantasy that one day I'm going to be in a position where I'm only working with adults. But I spent 36 years in the Army and now another decade out. It's really hard to find those organizations that are all adults. So yes, I think it's important. Yes, I think it can be done. Yes, I think it would value the organization. So you need to just stay after it. These organizations don't change easily or quickly. You know, this is when a Navy concept comes into mind. If you have a little sailboat, you can make it changes real easy. But when you're on a battleship or an aircraft carrier, that Hummer is moving really, really slowly, and you feel like nothing's happening. And then all of a sudden you went, oh, we did make a shift, but it's a whole lot harder to see.
Well, thank you for that. Let's see. I'm going to kind of flip in between some of my questions and some of the ones we're getting. So how did you deal with bullies in the workplace?
I grew up with one, so I was kind of used to bullies. And my father usually had a gun or a knife in his hand when he was playing bully. So I would look at these Army people that were trying to bully me, and I'd think, hell, I don't see a gun or a knife. Sit down, shut up. I think the best story I can tell you about that is there was a horrible bully. The garrison commander was a horrible bully when I was at Fort Drum. And he was this big advocate for the Union. And I was a big advocate for soldiers. No surprise there. So we were constantly butting heads. You're going to get the Union upset and they're going to file a grievance against General Campbell. And I'm like, yeah, and we'll win because the labor union is full of doo-doo. But suppose they file. Well, who cares if they file? So the labor union president was just this stereotypic 400 pounds, chain smoking, but she would often talk about how important her little 5-year-old was to her. So I stopped after a meeting one day and I said, hey, look, you keep talking about how important your son is to you, but if you keep treating your body the way that you are, you're not even going to see him graduate from high school. So I'd be happy to help you set up a healthcare, plan and get connected with providers downtown so you could address your smoking and your eating and your lack of exercise. And so she harumphed off, highly offended. So she goes and whines to the garrison commander. He calls me up. We're both colonels and I'm a senior colonel to him. But he calls me up, he goes, Pollock, get over here. And I'm like, oh, here we go. So I drive over to the headquarters and I go into his office and I sit down on the couch and he's standing behind his desk and I'm sitting on the sofa, on the sofa, the couch. And so he's like, rah, 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 shouting and waving his finger and telling me what a dirtbag I am. And I'm thinking, well, I can just sit here and ignore him until he blows out. Nah, then he thinks he wins. I could just walk out. Nah, then he thinks he wins. So I got up And I went to his desk and I leaned across it and put my hands on his side of the desk, and he physically backed up. So you know you got a bully. And I said, Carl, have you ever looked at my rating scheme? And he said, no. And I said, so you're not effing in it. So kiss my. And then I turned around and walked out. The NCO that was outside was like, you go, ma'am, you go. By the time I got back to the hospital, phone's ringing off the hook. I'm getting phone calls from line officers all over the post. Ma'am, we heard you just told off Colonel J. I'm like, yeah, he's a jerk. I'm really sorry. It's like, well, he does that to us all the time. So now I'm apologizing to line officers all over Fort Drum because they have to deal with a colonel who's totally inappropriate. I'm like, ugh, what a jerk. I said, don't learn his lessons. It's not how you behave. It's not how you treat people. But I dealt with a bully at Walter Reed as well. And the way that he would bully is he would get out like a 12-inch Bowie knife and sit at his desk and talk to you and wave the blade. Well, so he was an anesthesiologist. He had all of the anesthesiologists terrified. And the CRNA I replaced said, Gale, I carried my own knife so that when he pulls his on me, I take mine out. And I'm like, you gotta be kidding me. So he insists I come into his office one day and he takes out his blade. And I looked at him, and I don't call him doctor. I don't call him colonel. I say, Brian, put that freaking knife away and take it home. And if I ever hear that you've taken it out and threatened anyone for any reason, I'll bring you up on charges. Do you have any questions? He's like, but. Do you have any questions? He never played his knife game again. Crazy people.
How about a topic that's big in the military right now, which is sexual harassment? Did you deal with sexual harassment during your time in the Army?
Only one time did I experience that myself. I had, after my really great boss in Germany, he was replaced by a guy who would come in and make all kinds of comments about how he wanted to be with me. His wife was one of the other nurses we worked with. You know, I was like, you are such a jerk. And so, you know, he'd come in to give me a break and say, hey, I'll give you a break if you agree to blah, blah, blah. So I waited one day until everybody was in the break room and he walked in and I said, hey, the next time you say anything like that to me, I'm going down to the chief nurse and then I'm going to the hospital commander and I'm bringing up charges under UCMJ. Any questions? He never entered a room again that I was in. But, you know, because I grew up with a crazy person, I was never intimidated by people being stupid. I just call them on it. And I know that's hard for a lot of people to do, but we have to do it. Because if we don't call them on their behavior, they don't stop. You know, sexual harassment, it was never brought to my attention in my commands. And I trusted my NCOs, my command sergeant majors. So, and we had such a good working relationship. I think that if something had gone on, I would have heard about it. So I don't know if it was people knew that I wasn't the kind of boss they'd want to end up in front of having done something like that. But I knew it was going on in places, but I never sensed it, saw it, felt it, other than the one bozo that I had to deal with. I know that it happens to our young officers and our enlisted people a lot, and the number has actually increased. But the only way we're going to deal with that is calling them on it. We have to support men and women, because we actually, inside the military, more men are sexually harassed or assaulted than women. But, you know, being nurses, we're probably 60% of us are women. So we think more about the women because that's been more traditional, you know, but rape and all of that, they've been tools of war for centuries.
Yes. You know, I was a chief nurse at the VA, and a lot of them will come through with military sexual trauma. So
Mhm.
thanks for bringing that up. I'm going to ask a question from Colonel Don Flynn, who is the president of ANCA. And there was another question that's similar, I think, from Major Promotable Francis Young, who is the deputy consultant and the assistant chief nurse at Weed Army Community Hospital. So I'll read Colonel Flynn's first, and then I'll try and incorporate Major Francis's. A number of our Army nurses currently on active duty in the reserves and the National Guard are experiencing moral injury, burnout, and staffing actions due to the op-tempo and decreased authorizations. How would you recommend these nurses address these issues with their senior leaders without the suck it up mentality and response? And let me see, Major Francis said, from your perspective, what do you believe is one of our current capability gaps in nursing that you wish you could influence or communicate to those in charge today? So similar, not exactly the same question.
I totally concur that we're stretched very thin. The last 2 years have put the demands of the nation on the military. So not only are we trying to deal with deployments and all of the other things and healing ourselves after having been deployed and trying to deal with all of the emotional baggage that comes from dealing with trauma. But now we're out there in an environment where we're the fill-ins. And I keep asking, oh, good, we're going out on yet another deployment to COVID. How many times are these men and women being asked to do these deployments? How are they getting downtime? How are they being supported in their families? So I think that institutional support, it's not that the senior leaders don't want to provide it, but I'm not sure that we know how, because we all respond to stress differently. And what might help Gale might not help Lenny, might not help John or Tom. So we have to really look at ourselves and say, what do I need? This is a really hard time. What do I need? And then we have to be willing to be vulnerable enough to tell our bosses. And don't tell your boss if they act like a 4-year-old, because all you're going to get is the suck it up. There are adults in each of our organizations. No matter the size of our organization, there's a couple of adults there that you can sit down and say, you know, let's talk about this. Because when you get a couple of the senior adults, they know where there's a couple of other senior adults. And then they can start to talk and they can start to bubble those things up. And I wish we didn't have to manage our bosses. But unfortunately, it is something that we still have to do. You know, like I said before, I had this fantasy that I could work with adults, but you know, there were always 1 or 2 around, but they were never the majority, which is really sad to say, but it's just the truth. So being able to recover, to maintain the resilience, I think is actually a capability gap, because this is going to sound really funny, but our lives are pretty easy in America. We don't really want for things. Well, we want things, but we don't need them. But we're so used to our immediate gratification in society that it makes dealing with things for a longer period of time when they're hard, even harder. And that's why learning how to do self-care becomes so important, because then when you're surrounded by cuckoo people all the time, you know that you're doing everything that you can to keep yourself strong and resilient, because that's what your patients need from you. Whether they're sick from COVID, they're injured on a battlefield, they're in a motor vehicle accident, they're sick from some other disease of aging. That's what people need from us. They need our strength and our resilience. And I'm just totally committed to the fact that that really is our responsibility. So figure it out. It doesn't make you selfish to take care of yourself. It's what you have to do if you want to take care of other people. So there are lots of times that when I was on active duty, people say, Gale, we need you to do this. No. And they get this look. No, my plate's full. Oh, okay. And they go ask somebody else. You got to learn to say no. It's a little word. It's easy to say, but it's hard to say. No, practice it. No, 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 no. Go ahead. Let's have another question.
Okay, let's go back to the anesthesia world. And this is from John Zitzelberger. And he said, do you think there is a possibility, and then in parentheses, a danger to expose my bias, of anesthesia assistants being incorporated in the DoD anesthesia organization?
Okay. All right. Let me think about a nice way to say this. Let's not get sucked into the historical behaviors of people who thought that we were unsafe and shouldn't be practicing. The bottom line in Gale's brain, and I know I'm a maverick, okay, I got it. But in Gale's brain, the bottom line is safety. Can they learn to do things safely? Can they demonstrate through research, as we have done as nurse anesthetists, that they're safe providers? There aren't enough freaking providers in the nation. And I think that we've developed such silos and narrow focuses and so many reasons to exclude others. I had the opportunity to spend time in India, looking at healthcare in India. In the US, if you took a non-high school graduate and had them doing surgery on the eye, the whole nation would be in an uproar. But there they've recognized that they want someone who wants to do it, who will learn how to do it well and safely, and will take high quality care of their patients. And they don't require 19 years of specific skill development in 19 lanes when, okay, all we're going to let them do is X. And if they can do X safely, then let them do it. And I think that it will be up to the anesthesia assistant population to demonstrate to the rest of us that they can be safe. I don't think that we need to be afraid of their joining the club because there aren't enough of us to take care of the people that need us anyhow. Gale's bias, not shared by many, I know that.
So Nancy Moulter, the immediate past president of ANCA, has a
I
great.
just saw your question. That's why I'm smiling.
Okay, so she said, what was your most joyous assignment in your career?
Joyous. I'm going to focus on that word.
Yeah.
I would say launch school, being in Europe, because launch school was the only place I worked where we weren't teaching everybody. We were all staff. So you went in and you worked with other staff and you just, you knew one another's strengths and weaknesses. And it was fun to be at work. It was fun to do anesthesia. And then when you weren't working, you had all of Europe to explore. And I went to school at night to get a master's in business because I am kind of a nerd. I like learning. Met my husband to be. We've been together now for 38 years. So I would say that launch school was my best assignment as far as joy in my life. I loved living in San Francisco when I was at Letterman. And again, it was a mixture of some good experiences because it was a tertiary center. So I got lots of challenging anesthesia to do. But then I had lots of things to play with outside of the hospital. I sailed, I skied, I roller skated. Spent a lot of times on my knees. I wasn't a very good roller skater.
So we're at the 1 hour mark. So maybe now would be a good time to transition a little bit to your post-Army career. And kind of along those lines, let me see. Tom Opes had a question and he said, General Pollock, how good to see you, Gale. Thanks for sharing some of your great story. My time in the Army was always the standard to which I compared much of my professional life, which I know is also true of me. And he said, I've missed it in so many ways. How about yourself?
That's a great awareness. Yeah, transitioning out of the Army when you have spent a number of years in that organization is very, very hard. And one of the things that I've learned, and I didn't know it when I transitioned out of the Army, notice I didn't say retired, because I am not interested in retiring and sitting in some chair or some golf cart or whatever and doing nothing. Not my game. But you have to know what you're going to do. What are you retiring or transitioning to? We can all talk about what we're leaving. I'm getting away from, but if you don't have anything to go to, that's why you look at so many retired men and women and see how much alcohol and substance abuse they struggle with. Because there's nothing to fill their sense of purpose, the hole that's in their heart from having left an organization that they found very rewarding. I was very fortunate. Senator Inouye, God via Senator Inouye, asked a question one day before I got promoted. I went down to watch congressional testimony. And the three surgeon generals were presenting on war casualties. It was early, it was beginning of 2004. And Senator Inouye listened to their briefing and then said, what are you doing for the blinded troopers? And the three docs looked at each other and said, not a problem. And Senator Inouye recoiled like they had slapped him in the face. And when he sat forward, he just went, oh, really? And my nursing antenna went wild. Wait a minute, this is a guy who spent hundreds of hours in Tripler healing. So hundreds of collective days with other wounded troopers, as they were called then. He received the Medal of Honor. So he knows the evil of the battlefield. What does he know that we've not recognized or forgotten? And after I got promoted, I sat down with the data guys, and that's when we figured out that 10 to 13% of all combat injuries involve the eye. It could be as simple as a cut eyelid. It could be as severe as removal of one or both eyes. And then I started looking about, well, what do we do? we give them a white cane. When was the last time you saw one of those? We offer them a guide dog. Well, there's about 6,000 guide dog users in the country and tens of thousands of people who need it. So throw that one out too. And we tell them to learn Braille. Adults don't learn foreign languages. Braille's a foreign language. I was like, okay, I'm not happy with these options. And then I started learning about other eye diseases, diabetic retinopathy, glaucoma, macular degeneration. I found out from the CDC that vision loss is one of the top 10 disabilities in the country, but nobody knows. The men and women on the healthcare team didn't know. I was mortified. I was so embarrassed that it's this big a national problem and I don't know about it. So I knew what I would do when I left the military. I was going to help figure out how to make their quality of lives better, because I remembered it rained. They got it in my head that my responsibility as a professional nurse was to lift someone to their highest quality of life in spite of disease or disability. And I decided I wasn't invited, but I was doing that for the visually impaired community. So I started a not-for-profit we call the Overcome Vision Loss Foundation. And we help people that want to obtain expensive devices, figure out how to talk to people in their community and their friends and family. And then we match the money that they raise so they can afford their devices. And then I started a patient education program using technology and the web stuff. And I'm out there trying to market that now. So we'll see whether or not I can make that real. But I knew what I wanted to do. But you gotta have, and it was hard for me because people in the civilian world don't understand what integrity is. They don't understand being what a battle buddy is. They don't understand that you watch one another's back, that you don't lie to each other. We might not like each other and you might not be on my annual Christmas card or, holiday card list, but I'm not going to lie to you because someone's life could be at risk. And they don't have that kind of parameter in the civilian world, so they don't get it. So, learning how to discern who's telling you the truth and who isn't is a hard skill to learn after you've been in an organization for 10 or 20 or 30 or more years. And I still struggle with it. I want to believe that people tell me the truth. Though my stomach now turns and goes, he's lying. They're lying. But you want to believe them. So it's tough. So what do you want to do? How do you want to contribute? When you figure that out, when you figure out a new purpose other than having, okay, I served as a nurse in the military of our nation, and I did lots of good things, and I worked hard. How are you going to take that energy, that commitment, that passion, and use it in the community so that the community can value the men and women who served, because they always hear in the media that we're all freaking broken and we don't have anything left to contribute. Well, they're full of crap. And we need to be out there in our communities demonstrating what we can do as military leaders.
Great answer. Colonel Kammermeyer, who corrected me, she wasn't general, but she is in my mind, said, are you still involved with training service dogs?
Wow, there's an emotional question, Greta, because Cruiser, who just had emergency surgery on Thursday night. We're waiting to find out if the bleeding spleen that he has is from the fact that he ate paper towels when he shouldn't have, and he was violently retching and tore his spleen, or if he's got a cancer. So right now I'm kind of focused on worrying about Cruiser. I'm still working with the visually impaired, but I have not done any training of dogs. I'm still doing presentations, and Cruiser still puts on his uniform and goes out with me so we can talk with families that need to have a dog or are interested in getting a dog, so they understand how they can incorporate them into their lives.
So let's see, I think I'm gonna read some of the comments that I'm not sure if you can see. Major Lene Place said, Major General Pollock, you are amazing. Thank you for speaking today.
You're kind.
Shirley Bratrude, I hope I said her name properly, said this is such an awesome conference. Louise Nation said, as a quick
One of my classmates from Rain.
yes, as a Rain classmate of yours, I just want to say how incredibly proud we are of your great accomplishments. And it's Louise Brault Nation.
Yeah. Thanks, Louise. You're kind. You guys are just kind. No, I just put my head down and tried to do what I thought was the next right thing.
So Kate Hill said she was a nurse in Vietnam and after married an officer and subsequently got pregnant.
They put her out.
I really wanted to stay in, but could not at the time. When did that reg change? This lecture is wonderful. We nurses are so often leaders. Thank you for doing this lecture. So I think that probably changed around the mid 70s.
I want to say 68 to 70 is when they started changing that regulation. But it's yeah, when you think about how it's changed, I've met a lot of nurses from Vietnam that because they married and then wanted a family, they couldn't stay. So it's really kind of cool to see how we've evolved from that to people like Patty Horoho, who had a family, and I don't know how she did it. You know, there were months I didn't see my husband, talk to my husband. I was busy. And she stayed and had her husband, and she had a couple of kids that are doing great. And more power to them. I don't know how they did it. I was always amazed by people that had kids. I told you early that I grew up in a crazy house. I was afraid I would repeat behaviors that I learned as a kid. So I wasn't ever willing to have children. And my husband thought about it, or well, before he was my husband, when we were talking about getting married, he thought about it. He goes, well, I just always thought you did that. You grew up, you got married, you had kids, but I don't need to do that. And so we had the Army as our kids. But the different ways that people use their energy, I'm amazed. People think I have energy, but I look at those folks that have families and go, how do you do that? How do you do that? How do you do self-care and families? I know it's hard. It's hard.
So Shirley Bratrude, who I read an earlier question from, she was a raindrop from 1975, so a year ahead of you. And I have some answers here all the way from 1972, 1975, mid 80s. So I don't know, I guess we could do a quick Google search.
Oh, we can ask the nurse historian to look it up, and then we can post it on ANCA and say, people asked the question and we didn't know the answer, and damn it, we found the answer.
Yeah, well, I don't know if CJ Moore was able to join us. Oh, Karen Gaussman Googled it and said 1978. So I remember before,
I was a decade too soon.
Yeah,
eternal optimist.
Married, and then it went to you couldn't be pregnant, and now, as you said, we have amazing men and women that seem to do it all.
That are single parents and do it all. Yep.
So, are there? Let's see. So Patricia Zindler Wernett, who's a retired Army nurse colonel, you were actually the chief of the corps when she retired in 2008, and her retirement letter has your signature. And she wanted to say that General Adams Ender says the truth always changes when you try to understand today from yesterday. So it is when you look back with historical perspective. So
And the other thing, when we try to do like a retrospective analysis, we don't know what people were really thinking, what was going on. We have pieces of information. You know, I think that for me, I can't speak for everyone, but for me, I like to assume, well, I realize that's a dangerous thing, but I would like to assume that people had good intentions and cared about others when they made the decisions that they did. I know that that's not always true, but I don't like going down those black holes and spirals. I'm going to be the optimistic Pollyanna because it's just a happier place to live. And I don't need another way to make myself miserable. I got a lot of people telling me why I should be miserable, and I'm not buying any of it.
Well, I think that's all the questions. Are there any other questions? And if not, I will go to you, General Pollock, for any last words you might want to give us before we end this awesome time with you.
Well, first, I'd like to thank you and ANCA for giving me the opportunity. It's been great to reconnect with folks, and names and things as they popped up just have made me grin. So many good memories. I joined the Army when I was 17, and I can't imagine a better decision in my life. You know, I think joining the Army, marrying Doug, they're the two best decisions in my life. So the Army and the Nurse Corps will always be very special to me because they gave me opportunities and adventures that I couldn't even dream about. So I would encourage all of you to don't let other people set your limits. You decide what is in your heart and mind to do, and just figure it out. It doesn't happen overnight, and it's never easy, but it's so rewarding. And then when you sit down, because you can't do another thing because your body's not helping you, you know that, I did everything I could. I don't think there'd be anything worse than to sit down and go, oh, gee, I wish I had. Get out there, take a risk, have an adventure. Do something that you want to tell other people about, even if they don't want to hear it, because you're excited that you did it.
So I think I'll end with two comments.
Oh, I have one more comment.
Sure.
I know that there were other questions and we couldn't get to all of them. My email's pretty simple, but you got to spell my name right. Gale, like the wind. I'm a troublemaker. S as in Sierra. Pollock, that with 2 O's, @gmail.com. Send me an email. I'll answer you. Maybe not that day, because I'm starting a business, I'm on boards, I'm doing PT. I still go to boot camp for an hour every morning, but be in touch. I'm happy to answer. And, if I don't know the answer, I'm going to say, I don't know the answer, but let's figure it out.
I think we actually did get to all the questions, but I definitely, I know you will answer. So Karen Gaussman, who is the incoming president of ANCA, and we hope you'll join us and others will join us at the convention in October in Bethesda. She wrote, awesome presentation and insight. Thank you for encouraging communication, embracing the receiver's bias. And Colonel Kammermeyer, thank you again for being an inspiration and inspiring us. And a lot of thank yous. Frances Young said she's awesome. I love her candor. And so I thank you. This was a lot of fun and very successful. It was good to communicate with you again. You'll have to come back out here and ride some horses.
That works. That works.
Let me know.
I'm doing a whole lot more riding than I was able to do when I was on active duty. So it's
good.
One of my little self-presents. And it's an adventure because I'm not very good, but it's a lot of fun.
So almost everybody stayed with us throughout the presentation. As you log off, you will get a 3-question survey. We really ask that you complete it, and please give us some ideas for upcoming webinars. We'd like to try and do this every couple of months, and it's been my honor to be the moderator for it. And I wish you a great rest of your weekend. And thank you again, General Pollock.
It was a pleasure. Thank you so much. Y'all have a great weekend. Stay safe. Do the right thing. Bye.